This week's E-Class is E-Class number 13, which is to do with epoxy patching mortars. We'll be going through 3 different types of epoxy mortars: a sand-filled, an aggregate-filled, and a finer filled epoxy that allows you to feather edge and deal with different forms of patching. So here we are, we've got our resin and we've got our sand. In this instance we're using quite a fine sand, as you can see. This type of sand has been cleaned and dried, washed and dried, often used in filter sand for pools. Okay, you'll see that the mixed ratio of resin, the amount that I have in each one of these is roughly the same volume as I have in each one of these. So in theory we should be able to do it 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1. And what I'm going to do is mix it in, and you get to see the changes in the viscosity and how the product behaves. The advantages of this type of material, or this type of resin-based epoxy mortar, is it's versatile. You can use it for lots of different things. You can go from varying thicknesses. In this instance you can see I've got some scalloped out areas, so we will need a feather edge here. We've got some a control joint, if you like, in simple terms, and some chipped concrete. These are etched, pre-etched concrete slabs. I don't normally like to etch, but it's convenient in this case. You can go right from, I've heard applicators doing 10-to-1, so 10 litres of sand to 1 litre of resin. That's a pretty dry mix. You would need to prime to get your adhesion, prime the slab first, and you'd need to seal to close off the top if you're going to do that. I tend to talk about 1-to-1, which is a fluid kind of grout, self-flowing kind of grout, up to 6-to-1. You can add, as you're on the day, you can add until you've got the viscosity that you're after. If you're in cold temperatures, you'll end up using less sand. If you're in warmer temperatures, you can end up using more sand. You'll note that the particle size means that we can't really feather off that well. And that means that you either need to look to sand or to grind or to work very neatly. You can't sand all that efficiently because it's sand. You can grind it okay. We will try an epoxy mortar later that we can sand as well. Another important point, if the resin allows you to, you can use a water and methylated spirits mix to help slick off the surface. But it has to be tolerant of water. It can't amine blush. Okay. So here we are, we've got some resin mixed up. You can see its viscosity there. What we'll do, we'll put it straight into the bucket. We've already mixed base and cure. What we'll do, I tend to use a flat bottomed spatula. Makes it nice and easy to scrape the sides, scrape the bottom. And what you've got to do is just slowly add the sand, keep mixing it. You can also throw a pigment pot into it. You'll see here that the consistency mixes in very quickly. The consistency here is kind of like, the sand that's running underneath the waves, if you like. You can see that it levels itself. If you were to pour it out, then it would actually flow into a crack and smooth itself off. For doing this type of work, I'd probably want a little bit stiffer. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll add in some more. That was 1-to-1 there. And we're about 1.5-to-1. It's becoming stiffer, harder to mix. You can see here, and the sort of test that I do to get a feel for it, is I just want to see how it smooths off. And you can see I can actually slick it off there. It still flows a bit, which is probably okay for these types of repairs. I'll just get the rest of that Sand in there. So now we're nearly 2 to 1. Now because we're using a very fine sand, you'll find that it tends to have a large surface area. And with a large surface area, it means that it's going to suck up more resin more quickly. See, it's still slumping a little bit. Now, for doing this type of repair, I actually want it to slump a little bit. So we'll stick it 2 to 1. Okay. Scraping the bottom, scraping the sides, of course. First thing we'll do is we'll have a bit of a play with a feathered edge. What we want to do is just get a feel for what we can do in these types of areas. And you can see what happens is that because the particle size is not infinitely small, it's 0.3 of a millimetre, as soon as I pull that down tight, you'll see that it starts to pull the product away where it's thinned off. So the way that I can resolve that is to just apply it a bit thicker across that area. Now, that means that when you look at it in profile, side on, you'll see that I've now actually got it built up in that area, which is of very little use. It means that I'm going to have to sand it back down again. So that's one of the points to pick up on the sand-filled mortars. The finer your particle size, the more you can actually bring that product down in thickness. The other thing to note is that the more you apply it across the substrate, the quicker it sucks up all the resin. Here what we're going to do is work just in the gap here. I'll just use a different type of scraper for a moment. And it's not the best type of product to use in these types of areas either. And the reason why is because you'll see that it doesn't quite fill the joint perfectly. Yes, you can use it to patch out some damaged concrete and so forth, but it doesn't really fill that void all that well. It kind of leaves it a bit underneath. Same thing with these smaller areas here. Okay, it's not really the ideal mix. Now if you hear a bit of yahooing in the background, you'd never believe it, but they're filming a rodeo back of our industrial complex here. Any dags you leave like that are going to be stuck there, okay? Now it's not the most ideal patching, but you can see I've filled the voids. I just wanted to show you as well what I talked about in being able to slick something off a little bit with some water. In this case, I'm just going to use a bit of water and you can apply it on your trowel if you like. And you'll just see that it enables me to just slick it off. The water doesn't actually do anything to the product, it just allows it to glide across the surface a bit. Just to close it off. Make sure you get rid of any dags. Now that type of repair will need to be ground across here, and it's still leaving some cavities. We'll get on to a better epoxy mortar repair product shortly. Okay, so we're back here with our piece of block. Position a little bit better. And what we're doing this time is we've actually got ourselves a pre-made epoxy resin mortar. This one here is supplied by a product called Artipox, manufactured in Australia. Now, the beauty about this style of product is you can put a tint pack into it, It's ready to use 1:1 by volume ratios. And in this case, I'm using a tint pack that's called pastel grey. So the idea being that when we've done our repair, we don't really end up with a different colour. This is the cure component. You don't really end up with a different colour to concrete, okay? This is the base, and it already has the pigment pot in it. We've got the same type of slab. It's a etched concrete slab. I've gouged it, I've cut in it so that we can get a feel for how it behaves in comparison to a sand-filled epoxy mortar. You can see here I'm using disposable gear. It's a tongue depressor. I tend to use tongue depressors and Chinese takeaway containers, readily available. They're a good size, good for doing samples as well. So get yourself a supply of them. So you can see it's very much a concrete colour. Okay, get the feel for it. Okay. Now we'll do the same thing again. We'll have a bit of a play with some of these scallops and just see how it behaves. You'll see even just immediately it behaves differently as we go across here. I don't have so much to sand. It's only a little bit of a depression, and if in fact I got a little bit better with my technique, I'd be able to rectify that. Actually need a bit of a bigger trowel. I might just come across with the other trowel there in a minute. Okay, so here we go. You can see that what we're dealing with in this instance is making it far easier to fill out these scallops. Okay, and it doesn't tend to leave a whole lot of product behind either. So when you're going around hunting for your products to use, wherever you are, have a look out for one of these types of epoxy, ready-made epoxy repair mortars. You'll see I kind of get into a pattern of how to do lines. Again, if your product is tolerant, then you can actually use, again, methylated spirits and water as a mix to help smooth off the surface. Methylated spirits, in the US, they call it denatured alcohol. If you have any, if any questions do arise as to the types of products that we're talking about, then just send me an email too, by the way, and I'll get that clarified up for you. Okay, so straight away you can see a vast difference between how that behaved and the sand-filled mortar behaved. Can repair all types of damages, or type of damage. And you'll see that I also didn't have to worry about priming. The mix is made well enough so that it's resin rich enough that I don't need to prime it. It'll close itself off as well. Get rid of my excesses. Okay, now if you're doing a floor type job, you can actually go onto that, particularly if you're flaking. You wouldn't even see these types of edges. Okay, so that's a resin, an epoxy mortar ready-made, you'll find the slumping is minimal because it's made to hold on and not actually drop out too much. The last type of epoxy mortar I want to show you is a little bit different. In this case here, we're trying to get a product not so much to fix up chips and dips and so forth, we're trying to set an underlayment, something that can rebuild a floor. It might be from 3 millimeters to 50 millimeters thick, or what's that, 1/8 of an inch to 2 inches thick. And in this case, what we've done is we've worked out, we've got the same resin that we tried before, the actual same volume as well. But in this case, we've picked out some different types of particle sizes. Okay? I'll just snapshot that. Okay. Here you can see a larger particle size. The key when you're doing these types of trowel down epoxy mortars for underlayment is your minimum thickness obviously can't be less than your particle size. And in fact, if you want it to be a smooth surface, a closed off surface, it should be twice that thickness. This particle size is somewhere around 2.5 millimeters. About half the size again, half the size again. Now there's a ratio. You saw before we did it at 2 litres or 2 parts of sand, this fine sand, to 1 part of resin, and it was quite thick and didn't want to slump and so forth. This type of mix has been, if you like, engineered together so that these combinations of aggregates fit perfectly well to create a matrix with very little air pockets in between it. You need minimal amount of resin to fill those voids, and you don't need to prime it, and you don't need to seal it. And more importantly, when you're applying it, you'll see that I can just slick it off without having to add water to it. Okay? So, let's put it together. We're going to put it in our mix bucket at the end of it. I'll just mix the resins together again so that you can see what that is about. Scraping the sides, scraping the bottom. Because we're going to be mixing it further, I'm not going to be too worried about the thoroughness of my mixing in this container. Okay. I've got my straight-edged spatula again so that I can scrape the bottoms and scrape the sides easily. No particular order. Just to show you there's no particular order. Now you can see, if you have a look at it closely now, you can see that you can just about slick it off, but you can see there's actually some pockets of air in there. That's what this finer material is for. Okay, and now you can see when we close it off, see how we can draw the resins up to the surface and it's closed off. Let's have a play. So if you're doing this type of material, generally what you're doing is you're troweling down somewhere around 5 millimeters. Now you can see I haven't pulled it right down tight yet, and you can see I can close it off straight away. Nothing sticking to the trowel because the resin is formulated to suit the aggregate mix. Okay, so no matter what my thickness is, if you can see how thick that is there, again, same thing. The blends allow me to go thick, right down to thinner, and if we pull it down tight, you can now start to see there's another step there, okay? And again, I can still close it off. All right? So this type of product is very convenient. Everyone should have worked out how to make this type of product based on what aggregates and resins are available locally. It takes a little bit of playing around. If you need some help with that, again, send me an email and I'll give you some help. It's kind of pointless me giving you the exact measurements or sizes and quantities of the aggregates I have here, because unless you are in my vicinity, you're not going to be able to get the exact same ones. But that's where I'm happy to talk to you via email and get a solution that works for you based on what you have in your local area. If you do run a taped edge, by the way, you can do taped edge with this, and it works quite well. The only thing is, before you pull the tape, you want to ensure, okay, I'll just tidy this off. Sorry, I just got distracted by the rodeo in the background. If you are going to run a taped edge, use gaffer tape or a cloth lined tape, because that enables, it gives it strength to start with. It pulls, there's a lot of adhesive on the layer, so you don't have to, there's no seepage of resins underneath it. And secondly, allow the product to gel adequately first. And when you pull, make sure that you pull the product away from the top of the surface, otherwise you could end up with dags landing on your mortar, and then you've got to try to scratch them off afterwards. Okay, don't know if you can see that. It's been very easy to put down. Nothing is stuck to the trowel at any stage. I haven't needed any water.